The first thing I remember is the silence. Not the peaceful kind. No wind, no birds, no engines in the distance, just heat pressing down on the desert like a held breath. My bike sat dead beside me, chrome blistering under the Arizona sun, oil ticking as it cooled like it was mocking me for believing I could outrun everything forever. I pulled off my helmet and tasted dust and metal in the back of my throat. I had crossed states without stopping. Now, for the first time in years, the road had decided for me. The town appeared 20 minutes later like a mirage that refused to disappear. One main road, a diner, a gas station, and a low, sun-bleached garage with a flickering open sign. I told myself I'd be gone by morning. I always was. I didn't know yet that this place wasn't a pause. It was a reckoning. Mary was leaning over an engine when I walked in, sleeves rolled up, hands black with grease, sunlight catching the curve of her jaw. She looked up once, slow and assessing, eyes steady in a way that made me feel suddenly transparent. "You broke down out there?" she asked, like she already knew the answer. I nodded. When she wiped her hands on a rag, my chest tightened for reasons that had nothing to do with heat exhaustion. That night, I lay on the thin motel mattress, staring at the ceiling fan cutting slow circles through the dark. My phone buzzed with messages I didn't open. Memories I'd buried clawed closer. I told myself I was only stuck because of the bike, that I wasn't scared, that this town didn't matter, that Mary didn't matter. I was wrong about all of it. Before we go any further, subscribe to the channel if you want stories that stay with you long after the screen goes dark. And tell me in the comments, have you ever run from something you weren't ready to face? I've been riding long enough to know the road isn't freedom. It's just movement. My name is Laura. I'm 31 years old, and for most of my adult life, I've lived between gas stations, cheap motels, and whatever stretch of asphalt came next. I don't stay. I don't decorate. I don't learn people's routines. The rules are simple. Ride until the noise in my head quiets. Sleep. Repeat. When things start to feel heavy, I move faster. Arizona was never a destination. It was just another line on the map I meant to cross without thinking. That morning started like all the others. Coffee burned my tongue at a roadside stop, the sun already climbing like it had something to prove. I checked the bike out of habit, tires, chain, oil, then swung my leg over and took off. Riding puts me inside my body in a way nothing else does. The vibration, the wind pressing against my chest, the horizon stretching endlessly forward. When I'm moving, I don't think about the relationships I left without explaining. I don't think about the voice messages I never listened to. I don't think about what happens if I ever stop. The sound started as a whisper, a faint rattle buried under the engine's usual hum. I ignored it. I always do. 10 miles later, it was louder, uneven, like something knocking from the inside. I clenched my jaw and kept riding, heat shimmering off the road, the desert opening wide around me. I told myself I'd deal with it at the next town. I always tell myself that. The bike had other plans. When the engine finally died, it wasn't dramatic. No explosion, no smoke, just silence. I coasted to the shoulder and sat there for a moment, hands still on the grips, staring straight ahead like the road might apologize. It didn't. The sun pressed down hard, and the only sound was metal ticking as the engine cooled. Anger came first, sharp and familiar. Fear tried to creep in after, but I shut it out. I pulled my helmet off, wiped sweat from my face, and waited. The tow truck dropped me in a town that felt like it had learned how to survive by not changing. One main road, a diner with a neon sign buzzing lazily, a gas station, and a low garage at the edge of town with an open sign flickering like it might give up at any second. Mary's Auto and Cycle, the sign said. I didn't know then how many times I'd read that name before I left, or if I'd leave at all. Mary was bent over the hood of a truck when I walked in, sleeves rolled up, grease streaked across her forearms like proof of work done honestly. She looked up slowly, eyes steady, assessing me without hurry. She wasn't flashy. She wasn't trying. She just existed in her space, with a confidence that made me feel suddenly out of place. "You the rider?" she asked. Her voice was calm, grounded, the kind of voice that didn't waste words. She listened to my bike the way I listen to weather, attentive, intuitive. Her hands moved with certainty, touching, adjusting, pausing to hear what the engine was telling her. I watched more than I meant to. When she straightened, she met my eyes directly. "You pushed it after it started knocking," she said. It wasn't an accusation, just a fact. "I didn't have a choice," I replied. Mary's mouth curved slightly. "You usually do. You just don't take it." Before I could respond, a customer walked in complaining about a stalled pickup just outside town. Mary handled him without raising her voice, firm and unbothered, shutting down his impatience with quiet authority. I felt an unexpected spark of admiration watching her work. When she hung up, she glanced at me. "I'll be quick," she said. "You can come if you want." I surprised myself by saying yes. The desert looked different at night. Cooler, softer, almost intimate. I rode in Mary's service truck while she drove, radio low, headlights cutting through the dark. At the stranded car, I held a flashlight while she worked, our shoulders brushing occasionally in the narrow space. Each time it happened, my awareness sharpened. Nothing overt, nothing planned. Just proximity and the hum of attention that made my pulse pick up for reasons I didn't want to analyze. Back at the garage, Mary wiped her hands and finally gave me the verdict. The part I needed wasn't local. Days, maybe more. "You're not riding out tonight," she said. "And probably not tomorrow." I felt the familiar urge to argue, to throw money at the problem, to leave anyway. But the town was quiet, the desert vast, and Mary's gaze didn't waver. "There's a motel down the street," she added. "And if you're hungry, the bar next to the diner is still open." The bar was small and loud in a way that felt lived in. Locals glanced at us, curious but not unkind. Mary ordered us beers without asking, slid mine across the counter like she already knew my taste. We sat close, knees touching now and then, neither of us moving away. We talked about roads, engines, places we'd been. Nothing heavy, nothing confessional. Just enough to feel the pull of something forming under the surface. When we walked out into the warm night, the desert air wrapped around us, thick and quiet. I stood there for a moment, beer buzz humming under my skin, watching Mary lock up the garage. I told myself I was only staying because of the bike, that this town was temporary, that Mary was just a woman doing her job. Even then, I knew I was lying. I woke up earlier than I wanted to, the kind of restless sleep that comes when your body slows down before your mind does. The motel room smelled faintly of cleaner and desert dust, sunlight already forcing its way through the thin curtains. For a few seconds, I didn't remember where I was, then I did, and the familiar instinct to leave kicked in. I reached for my phone out of habit, scrolled past missed messages without opening them, and sat on the edge of the bed, wondering why the urge to run felt quieter than usual. The diner Mary had mentioned was already busy when I walked in. Coffee, grease, laughter bouncing off the walls. I felt visible in a way I wasn't used to, my leather jacket out of place among denim and work boots. I ordered eggs and toast and tried not to notice how often people glanced my way. Small towns do that. They catalog you. I told myself it didn't matter. I was only here because the bike forced me to be. Mary showed up halfway through my coffee, hair still damp, wearing a faded t-shirt and jeans instead of grease-stained sleeves. Seeing her outside the garage did something unexpected to me. Like the context shift made her more real. She smiled when she spotted me, slid into the booth across from mine without asking. "Figured you'd end up here," she said. Her voice sounded different this early, softer, less guarded. We ate together, unhurried. She asked where I'd ridden last. I answered with places, not stories. She didn't push. She told me about the town instead, how it looked quiet, but people had long memories, how everyone knew when someone new arrived. "They'll stop staring by tomorrow," she added, then paused. "Or they won't." After breakfast, we walked back to the garage together, the sun climbing fast. Mary handed me a rag and pointed to a workbench. "You want to help? You can clean parts, or you can watch." The challenge in her tone made me grin. I chose both. I wiped metal clean while she worked, standing close enough that our shoulders brushed more than once. Each time, neither of us apologized. Mid-morning, a woman pulled up with a busted radiator and 2 kids in the back seat, panic written all over her face. Mary took charge immediately, calm and efficient, directing me to fetch tools, explaining things just enough that I could follow. I liked being useful. I liked how she trusted me without making a big deal of it. When the kids started complaining about the heat, Mary grabbed popsicles from a freezer in the back and handed them over like it was the most natural thing in the world. Something about that stayed with me. During a lull, Mary leaned against the counter beside me, close enough that I could feel the warmth of her arm through my shirt. "You're not bad," she said. "For someone who rides everything into the ground." "Occupational hazard," I replied. She looked at me for a long moment, then smiled. "You always joke when someone gets too close?" "Only when it matters." The afternoon stretched on, heat, engines, conversation that drifted from motorcycles to music, to the worst decisions we'd ever made without actually naming them. The town filtered in and out. Faces curious, then familiar. I noticed how Mary greeted people, how they softened around her. She belonged here. The thought unsettled me more than it should have. Later, she suggested a break. "Bar's quiet this time of day," she said. "You up for it?" I said yes before thinking, surprised by how easy the word came. We walked there together, dust kicking up under our boots. Inside, it was dim and cool, a few locals nursing beers. We sat at the bar, close again, conversation slower now, heavier in the pauses. Her knee brushed mine and stayed there. I didn't move away. At some point, the jukebox crackled to life. An old song I half remembered. Mary tilted her head toward me to be heard, her mouth close enough that I caught the faint scent of oil and soap. The space between us tightened. I felt the moment forming, the kind that usually sends me reaching for an exit. Instead, I stayed still. Her eyes flicked to my mouth just once, then back up. It wasn't a kiss, but it was a promise. We were walking back when her phone rang. Another customer. A stalled bike this time, just outside town. Mary sighed, then looked at me. "You don't have to." "I want to," I said, surprising both of us. The ride out was quiet, the sky darkening into deep blue. At the roadside while Mary worked, I held the light again, this time when she straightened. She didn't step away right away. We stood there, close, breath mingling, the desert holding its breath with us. Her hand brushed mine, deliberate. I felt it all the way through my chest. Back at the motel later, I lay awake longer than the night before. My body hummed with awareness of her hands, her voice, the way staying no longer felt like failure. I told myself it was just attraction, just circumstance. But as I stared at the ceiling, one thought kept repeating, steady and unsettling. I wasn't just stuck in this town. I was choosing to be here. The days started to blend together in a way that felt unfamiliar to me. Not boring, dense. Mornings at the garage, afternoons thick with heat, evenings that seemed to arrive faster than I expected. I stopped checking the map on my phone. I stopped counting how long I'd been here. The bike sat half open in the bay, waiting on parts. And for once, I didn't resent the delay. I told myself it was practical. I told myself a lot of things. Mary and I fell into a rhythm without naming it. She handed me tools without looking. I learned where everything lived in the garage. Sometimes we worked in silence, the kind that didn't itch. Other times we talked about nothing, music she liked, roads I'd hated, places that surprised us. She never asked why I left places so easily. I never asked why she stayed. The unasked questions hovered between us, charged but not yet heavy. That afternoon, a couple came in arguing about a vintage bike that refused to start. Mary listened, calm as ever, then asked me to take a look at the carburetor while she handled the paperwork. I felt a jolt of pride at the trust, followed immediately by nerves. I knelt beside the bike, focused, aware of Mary watching from across the room. When I finally got the engine to turn over, she smiled at me like I'd just done something that mattered. The look stayed with me longer than it should have. We closed the garage later than usual. The sky had turned that deep orange that only shows up in the desert, everything softened by dust and light. Mary leaned against the counter, stretching her shoulders, and glanced at me. "Drink?" she asked, like it was already our thing. It felt like it was. The bar was louder than the night before, a group celebrating something I didn't ask about. We took our usual spots, close enough that my thigh pressed against hers. This time, neither of us pretended it was accidental. She ordered for both of us again. I noticed the way she watched me over the rim of her glass, steady, curious, like she was trying to decide something. "You ever miss staying?" she asked. Casual, but not careless. I laughed softly. "I don't know how." She nodded, like that answered more than I meant it to. "I used to think leaving was the hard part," she said. "Turns out staying scares people more." The words landed somewhere deep. I shifted, suddenly aware of my body, of the space between us that felt smaller by the second. When the song changed on the jukebox, Mary stood and held out her hand. "Come on." "I don't dance," I said automatically. She smiled. "Neither do I." That was how we ended up swaying awkwardly near the back of the bar, not really dancing, just moving enough to justify being close. Her hands rested on my waist, light but sure. Mine settled on her shoulders, then slid lower without permission from my brain. The room faded. All I could register was her warmth, the way she smelled faintly of soap and oil, the way her breath hitched when I leaned in just a little. For a moment, we hovered there. Too close to ignore, too careful to rush. I'd lived my life on momentum, on instinct. But this felt different, slower, heavier. I could feel the choice pressing in. Mary tipped her head slightly, eyes flicking to my mouth, then back to my eyes like she was giving me space to decide. That did it. I leaned in and kissed her. It wasn't explosive. It was deliberate. Soft at first, then deeper when she responded, her hand tightening at my waist. The world narrowed to that contact, to the simple fact of her mouth on mine, answering instead of pulling away. When we finally broke apart, neither of us spoke. We didn't need to. Outside, the night wrapped around us, quieter now. We walked side by side, hands brushing until Mary laced her fingers through mine without looking. I didn't pull away. My chest felt tight, full in a way that scared me more than the road ever had. At the motel, we stopped by my door. The moment stretched. Mary reached up, brushed her thumb along my jaw, and kissed me again. Slower this time, more certain. I kissed her back without hesitation, my hands finding her waist, memorizing the shape of her. When she finally stepped back, her eyes were dark, searching. "We don't have to rush," she said. "I know," I replied. And for once, I meant it. Later, alone, I lay awake replaying everything. The garage, the bar, the kiss that had changed the air between us. I should have felt the familiar urge to run. Instead, all I felt was awareness. Of her. Of myself. Of the fact that something real had started and that I'd let it. For the first time, stopping didn't feel like losing momentum. It felt like stepping into something I actually wanted. The kiss didn't end things, it rearranged them. The next morning, I woke up with the unfamiliar sense that something had shifted under my skin. The motel room looked the same. Thin curtains, sun-bleached furniture, the hum of the air conditioner, but I didn't. My body remembered Mary's mouth, the weight of her hand at my waist, the steadiness in her eyes when she stepped back instead of pulling me closer. I wasn't used to restraint being intimate. Usually it felt like rejection. This time, it felt like intention. At the garage, nothing was said at first. Mary greeted me the same way she always did. A quiet nod, a mug of coffee set on the counter like it had been there all along. But the air between us was different, charged, aware. When our hands brushed passing a tool, neither of us pretended it was accidental. She glanced at me, just once, and I felt it all over again. Not urgency, gravity. Work came in waves that day, a delivery truck with a cracked hose, a teenager with a bike that wouldn't start, and too much pride to admit he'd flooded the engine. Mary let me handle it while she watched from a distance, arms crossed, eyes warm with approval. I caught myself smiling at her without meaning to. It startled me how easy it felt. By late afternoon, the heat had settled into everything. Mary shut the garage doors and leaned against them, stretching her shoulders. "You eaten?" she asked. "Not really." She hesitated, then said it like it was no big deal. "You can come by my place. I was going to cook." That should have been the moment I made an excuse. I'd always been good at those. But I heard myself say yes, felt the decision land in my chest with a mix of excitement and unease. Following her to her house felt different from the bar, from the garage. This wasn't neutral ground. Mary's place sat just outside town, modest and quiet, the kind of house that looked lived in rather than styled. Inside, it smelled faintly of clean linen and something warm from the kitchen. She moved easily through the space, comfortable in it. And I realized how rarely I saw people inside their own lives. I hovered for a moment, then followed her lead, washing my hands, opening a bottle of wine when she nodded toward it. We cooked together without much talking. Vegetables chopped, pasta boiling, music low in the background. Our shoulders bumped now and then, familiarity growing fast. When she handed me a spoon to taste the sauce, our fingers brushed and stayed that way for a second longer than necessary. I looked up at her. She didn't look away. Dinner was simple and good. We ate at a small table, knees touching beneath it. Conversation drifted to lighter things. Music, the worst jobs we'd ever had, how strange it felt when someone new disrupted your routine. There was laughter, easy and genuine, and underneath it a current of something deeper that neither of us named. After, we moved to the couch with our wine. The day caught up to me all at once. The heat, the slowing down, the awareness of her beside me. Mary sat close, not crowding, just present. When she reached for my hand, it felt natural, inevitable. We leaned in and kissed again, slower than the night before, more certain. I felt the warmth of her, the steadiness, the way she stayed instead of rushing ahead. We didn't talk about rules or expectations. We didn't need to. One kiss led to another, unhurried, the kind that lets you breathe. When she rested her forehead against mine, her thumb brushing my cheek, I felt something unfamiliar tighten in my chest, want mixed with trust. "Stay," she said quietly. Not as an order, not as a test. I did. The night unfolded gently. We lay side by side, close enough to feel each other's presence, learning the shape of that closeness without rushing to define it. There was comfort in it, in the quiet. In the simple fact of being there, I realized how rare that was for me, to stay through the stillness instead of filling it with motion. Later, when sleep came, it came easily. I woke once in the early hours, disoriented, then felt her beside me and settled again. The fear that usually followed moments like this didn't arrive. Or maybe it did, quieter than before, waiting its turn. In the morning, light spilled across the room. Mary was already awake, moving softly, making coffee. I watched her from where I lay, the ordinariness of the moment hitting me harder than any dramatic goodbye ever had. This was the thing I didn't let myself have. The after. The morning. As I dressed to leave for the garage, I caught my reflection in the mirror and barely recognized the woman looking back. I wasn't calmer. I wasn't fixed. But something had loosened. Staying the night hadn't trapped me. It had made leaving feel more complicated. I woke up in Mary's bed with the slow, disorienting warmth of someone else's space wrapping around me. Morning light filtered through the thin curtains, dust dancing in the air, the desert already awake. For a moment, I lay still, listening to the quiet house, to my own breathing, to the unfamiliar absence of panic. Usually mornings like this came with an urge to leave before reality caught up. This time, the urge arrived late, dulled by the memory of Mary's body beside mine, the way she had touched me without rush or hesitation. She was already in the kitchen when I joined her, barefoot, hair loose, wearing an old t-shirt that looked like it had lived a long life. She handed me coffee without asking how I took it. I noticed that. We stood close, not touching, the kind of space that feels intentional rather than awkward. "Garage opens in an hour," she said, like she was giving me an option, not a directive. "I'll walk with you," I replied, surprised by how normal it sounded. At the shop, work came fast. A ranch truck overheating, a delivery van with a belt that had given up under the heat. I moved easily beside Mary now, reading her cues, anticipating her needs. When she leaned in to explain something, her voice low near my ear, I felt it everywhere. The romance wasn't separate from the work. It lived inside it, in the glances, the shared focus, the way our hands brushed and didn't pull away. Late morning, she asked me to grab a part from the back while she dealt with paperwork. That's when Vanessa walked in. I felt her before I heard her, an energy shift, a presence that demanded attention. She wore sunglasses inside, confidence sharp enough to cut. She looked at Mary like she was checking a claim. Then her gaze slid to me, slow, appraising. "Didn't know you were hiring help," she said, voice sweet in a way that meant the opposite. Mary's shoulders tightened just slightly. "What do you need, Vanessa?" Vanessa smiled. "Just a tune-up. Figured I'd come by myself instead of calling." Her eyes stayed on me. Didn't expect company. Something old and defensive flared in my chest. I'd spent years being the outsider, the temporary one people felt free to comment on. I didn't like how familiar the feeling was. "I'm just passing through," I said evenly. Vanessa laughed once. "They always are." Mary cut in, firm. "Your bike can wait if you can't be respectful." Vanessa's smile thinned, but she dropped her keys on the counter anyway, and walked out like she'd marked territory. The silence she left behind felt heavier than the heat. I didn't ask questions right away. I busied myself with work, hands moving faster than necessary. Mary didn't explain either. The space between us shifted, not cold, but strained. It followed us through the afternoon, threading itself into every glance, every unfinished sentence. We closed late. When Mary asked if I wanted to go to the bar, it felt like an olive branch. I said yes. The bar was louder than usual, crowded with locals. We sat close out of habit, but the tension didn't dissolve right away. I watched Mary's fingers trace the rim of her glass, the way her eyes flicked toward the door now and then. I reached out and covered her hand with mine. She stilled, then turned to look at me, something soft breaking through her guarded expression. "Vanessa's history," she said finally. "Not recent. Not something I'm interested in revisiting." "I didn't ask," I replied. "But I felt it." Mary nodded. "I figured you would." That honesty mattered more than reassurance. She leaned in then, kissed me, slow, grounding, public without being performative. The kiss didn't erase the tension, but it reframed it. When she pulled back, her forehead rested briefly against mine, like she was choosing me in that moment. Later, outside under the open sky, she walked me back to the motel. We stopped at my door, the night warm and quiet around us. I could feel the question hovering. What happens next? How much this costs? You don't owe me anything, Mary said softly. I know your kind of life. I swallowed. And yet, you keep inviting me into yours. She smiled, sad and real. Because I want you here, even if it's temporary. That word hit harder than I expected. Inside, alone, I sat on the edge of the bed and let the fear finally surface. Wanting Mary wasn't the problem. I'd wanted people before. The problem was how much I liked staying. How easily I was slipping into her rhythm. How quickly the town had started to feel familiar. The bike parts were coming. The road was waiting. And for the first time, the choice ahead didn't feel like freedom. It felt like a cost. The box with the parts arrived earlier than I expected, dropped on the garage counter with a dull thud that sounded louder than it should have. I felt it in my chest before I processed what it meant. Time had been a soft thing until then. Stretchy, forgiving. Now it had edges. Mary signed for the delivery without ceremony, slit the tape, and lifted the lid like this was just another task on the list. I watched from a few steps back, trying to ignore the familiar tightening in my shoulders. Looks like we can get you back on the road, she said, eyes flicking up to meet mine. There was no accusation in her tone, no relief either, just truth. Yeah, I replied. The word tasted thin. Work took over. We laid the parts out, checked specs, moved with the efficiency we'd built together over the last days. I knew where to stand now, when to pass a tool without being asked. Mary's focus sharpened in a way I'd come to recognize. Complete. Absorbed. I loved watching her like this. I hated what it meant. Every click of a ratchet felt like a countdown. By midday, the town seemed to know something had shifted. People drifted in under pretense. An oil check, a question, a wave from the door. Eyes lingered on me, then on Mary, curious in a way that felt heavier now. At the diner, the waitress asked Mary if she'd be coming to the weekend cookout. Mary said maybe. The waitress looked at me, then back at Mary, and smiled like she'd already decided the story for herself. I spent the afternoon fighting two instincts at once. One told me to lean in, to take Mary's hand when no one was looking, to memorize the way her voice softened when she spoke to me alone. The other urged me to prepare, to pack, to count miles, to imagine the road the way I always did when things got complicated. I did both badly. I kissed Mary in the narrow space behind the bay door, quick and hungry, then pulled away too fast. She didn't stop me. That somehow felt worse. When we closed, Mary suggested a ride, not on my bike, but on her old one. Before it gets dark, she said. It felt like an offering, or a test. We rode out past the edge of town, the desert opening wide, wind cooling the heat off my skin. The motion did what it always did, quieted my head. For a moment, I thought maybe I could keep both things, the road, her. We stopped where the asphalt gave way to dirt, engines ticking as they cooled. Mary took off her helmet and leaned against the bike, watching the sky bruise into purple. You're leaving soon, she said, not a question. Soon, I echoed. She nodded, accepting it the way she accepted broken parts and stubborn engines. I won't ask you not to, she said. But I won't pretend it doesn't matter. The honesty cut deeper than any plea would have. I stepped closer, slid my hands around her waist, pulled her into me. The kiss that followed was slower, heavier, charged with everything we weren't saying. I felt her grip tighten like she was bracing herself. I hated that I was the reason. Back in town, the bar was crowded, louder than it had been all week. We took our usual spots, but the energy between us was different. Electric, edged. Mary laughed at something I said, leaned into me, let her hand rest on my thigh like she was claiming the time we had left. I kissed her there, not caring who saw. The approval in her eyes made my chest ache. Later, in my motel room, the wanting finally overtook the fear. We undressed without urgency, learned each other again with more confidence than before. There was laughter, softness, heat. I let myself stay present, let myself need her, even knowing it would cost me. When she rested her head against my chest afterward, tracing idle patterns on my skin, I felt something settle. Heavy, right, terrifying. You don't have to decide everything tonight, Mary said quietly. I know, I replied. But the truth was, the decision had already started forming. Not clean. Not resolved. Just there. After she left, I lay awake listening to the desert night. The road called to me the way it always had. Familiar, promising escape, but now there was another pull, quieter but stronger, asking me to consider a different kind of movement. Staying still long enough to be seen, long enough to matter. The bike would be ready soon. I could feel the clock ticking, and for the first time, I wasn't sure which direction I wanted time to take me. The offer came in the least dramatic way possible, which somehow made it harder to ignore. My phone buzzed while I was standing behind the garage, hands black with grease, the smell of hot metal still hanging in the air. A message from an old contact, someone I'd ridden with years ago, someone who knew my patterns better than I liked. A route opening up, good money, fast miles, a clean way out. I stared at the screen longer than I should have, feeling the familiar pull settle into my chest like a reflex I'd never retrained. I didn't tell Mary, not right away. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and went inside, where she was tightening a bolt on my bike. Focused, intent, like she didn't feel the shift that had just cracked something open in me. Watching her work always calmed me. Today, it did the opposite. Every movement felt temporary now, like I was already packing things away in my head. The bike was close. That was obvious to both of us, even if we didn't say it out loud. She ran it briefly that afternoon, listening closely, then shut it off and nodded to herself. "Tomorrow," she said, "maybe the next morning, latest." She glanced at me, reading my face the way she read engines. "You okay?" "Yeah," I lied. The word came too fast. The town leaned in closer that day, like it sensed the ending before I did. People stopped by the garage with no real reason. A guy from the diner brought over iced teas. Someone asked Mary if she'd be coming to the cookout after all. She said yes this time, then looked at me like the answer carried weight. I smiled back, felt the guilt bloom sharp and immediate. I was already halfway gone. That evening, Mary suggested we skip the bar and go out past town instead, just the two of us. The desert cooled quickly after sunset, the sky wide and clear. We sat on the hood of her truck, boots dusty, shoulders touching. She talked about nothing important, about a customer who always complained, about the way the desert smelled different after dark. I listened, memorizing the sound of her voice, the way she gestured with her hands when she got animated. I wanted to hold on to it, even as part of me was preparing to let go. "You've been quiet," she said eventually. I shrugged. Thinking. She turned toward me, studying my face. "That usually means you're planning something." I laughed softly, but it sounded wrong even to me. "You make it sound dangerous." "It is," she replied, not smiling, "when you do it alone." I leaned in and kissed her before she could ask more. The kiss was deeper than I intended, loaded with everything I wasn't saying. She kissed me back without hesitation, hands warm at my waist, grounding me. For a few seconds, the world narrowed to just that, her mouth, her breath, the steady presence I'd come to crave. When we pulled apart, she rested her forehead against mine, eyes closed. "You don't have to disappear," she said quietly. The words hit harder than any accusation. I swallowed. "I'm still here." She nodded, but the trust in her eyes flickered, just slightly. It was enough. We went back to her place that night, not out of habit, but out of need. We moved through the space with a familiarity that felt earned now. No hesitation, no second guessing. The intimacy between us was deeper, slower, full of touches that lingered because they mattered. I held her like I was trying to commit her to memory, and that scared me more than wanting her ever had. After, lying beside her in the quiet, she traced idle lines across my arm. "What happens when your bike's ready?" she asked. Not challenging, just honest. I stared at the ceiling, heart pounding. This was the moment I should have told her, should have laid it all out. The offer, the road waiting. Instead, I chose the coward's version of the truth. "I don't know," I said. "I haven't decided." She was quiet for a long time. Then she nodded. "Okay." The word didn't mean acceptance. It meant she heard me. It meant she was giving me space I hadn't earned yet. I hated myself for taking it. Later, alone in the motel room, I reread the message on my phone. The route, the money, the promise of movement. It all fit the life I'd built perfectly. And yet, for the first time, it didn't feel like freedom. It felt like something I was choosing against someone, not for myself. Outside, the desert was quiet, indifferent as ever. The road was still there, waiting. So was Mary. And loving her while planning to leave felt like the cruelest thing I'd ever done. I left before the sun came up, the sky still pale and undecided, like it hadn't chosen what kind of day it wanted to be yet. I told myself it was easier that way. Less explanation, less emotion, less chance of changing my mind. My bike stood ready in front of the motel, engine quiet. Everything working the way it should. I packed fast, muscle memory taking over, the way it always did when I was about to disappear from somewhere that had started to feel dangerous. I didn't go to Mary's house. I didn't leave a note. I told myself that if I saw her, I wouldn't go, and that scared me more than leaving ever had. The road stretched open almost immediately, wide and empty. The desert still cool from the night. I rode fast, faster than I needed to, letting the wind tear at me, trying to drown out the weight in my chest. This was supposed to be the part where things got easier, where the noise quieted, where movement fixed everything. But the farther I went, the louder my thoughts became. By mid-morning, the heat returned with a vengeance. The road shimmered ahead of me, familiar and relentless. I passed signs for towns I didn't recognize and didn't care to learn. Normally, that anonymity felt like relief. Today, it felt hollow. I kept thinking about Mary standing in her kitchen, coffee brewing, expecting nothing. And that somehow made it worse. She hadn't asked me to stay. She hadn't begged. She'd trusted me to choose. I stopped at a gas station just outside a town I couldn't name. The air smelled like dust and fuel, the kind of place I usually liked because it asked nothing of me. As I filled the tank, my hands shook slightly. I told myself it was dehydration. Heat, anything but what it really was. Inside, my phone buzzed again with a follow-up message from the contact who'd made the offer. Everything was set. The route was waiting. I didn't answer. Back on the road, the panic hit without warning. Not sharp. Heavy. Like something pressing down on my chest from the inside. My breath shortened, my vision narrowing at the edges. I pulled over abruptly, gravel spraying, heart racing in a way that had nothing to do with speed. I sat there on the side of the road, helmet still on, hands gripping the bars like they were the only thing keeping me upright. This was new. I'd ridden away from worse things than this. Broken relationships, angry words, doors slammed hard enough to shake walls. I'd never stopped like this, never felt the road refuse to carry me forward. I leaned my forehead against the tank and forced myself to breathe. The heat pressing in, the silence unbearable. All I could see was Mary's face when she said she wouldn't pretend my leaving didn't matter. I stayed there longer than I meant to. Minutes stretched, indistinct. When I finally stood, my legs felt weak, unreliable. I knew I could keep going. I always could. The offer was still good. The road was still open. But something fundamental had shifted. Leaving didn't feel like choosing myself anymore. It felt like repeating a mistake I'd just learned how to name. I rode again, slower this time, letting the miles pass without trying to outrun them. The desert looked the same as it always had. Vast, indifferent, beautiful in its refusal to care. For years, that had been enough. Today, it wasn't. Every mile felt like distance from something real instead of distance from pain. By late afternoon, I found myself circling back without fully deciding to. The realization came quietly, somewhere between a familiar stretch of road and the sight of mountains I recognized. My chest loosened slightly when I turned around, like my body had been waiting for permission. I didn't feel brave. I felt exposed. I reached the edge of town as the sun dipped low, painting everything in gold and dust. The garage doors were still open. Mary's truck sat out front. I slowed, heart pounding, fear rising again. This time not of staying, but of being too late, of having crossed a line I couldn't uncross. I didn't stop right away. I rode past once, then again, like momentum might decide for me. Finally, I killed the engine a block away and sat there, helmet in my hands, staring at the street. This was the part the road had never taught me how to do. Go back. Face someone. Admit that leaving hadn't worked. I didn't know what Mary would say. I didn't know if she'd let me explain. I only knew that whatever happened next, I couldn't pretend anymore. The desert had always let me disappear. This town didn't. And for the first time, that felt like mercy. I didn't walk into the garage right away. I stood across the street longer than I care to admit, helmet under my arm, watching the familiar movements inside like I was looking through glass. Mary was bent over an engine, hair pulled back, posture steady, exactly as I remembered. Seeing her like that after leaving without a word made my chest ache in a way I hadn't prepared for. This wasn't a movie moment. There was no music swell, No dramatic entrance, just me, realizing how much damage silence could do. When I finally crossed the street, the bell over the door rang, sharp and unforgiving. Mary didn't look up at first. She finished what she was doing, wiped her hands, then turned. The second our eyes met, I saw it. The flicker of surprise, followed immediately by something harder to read. Not relief, not anger, something held tightly in place. "Your bike running?" she asked, voice level, professional. "Yes," I said. "Perfectly." She nodded once. "Good." That was it. No accusation, no welcome. She turned back to her work like I was just another customer who had wandered in off the road. It stung more than yelling would have. I stayed where I was, unsure where to put my hands, my body suddenly foreign again in a space that had felt like it belonged to me only days before. "I shouldn't have left like that," I said finally. The words sounded thin, even to me. "I wasn't trying to hurt you." Mary didn't turn around. "You didn't try," she replied. "You just did." The truth of it landed hard. I took a breath. "I don't know how to stay," I said. "But I know that leaving didn't fix anything." That got her attention. She turned slowly, studying my face the way she studied engines, looking past surface damage, assessing what could be repaired and what couldn't. "You don't get points for realizing that after the fact," she said. "I don't need explanations. I need consistency." "I know," I said. "I'm not asking you to trust me right now." "Good," she replied, "because I don't." The garage felt smaller suddenly, the walls closer. A customer walked in, breaking the tension, and Mary shifted seamlessly back into work mode. I stepped aside, watching her interact with someone else the way she had with me before. Calm, competent, warm in a controlled way. It was strange to feel like an outsider in a place I'd started to imagine myself in. I left without saying anything else and walked to the diner, nerves buzzing under my skin. I didn't know what I was doing anymore. For once, I wasn't running, but I also wasn't sure how to stand still. I drank coffee I didn't taste, stared out the window, replayed the look on Mary's face when she saw me again. Not closed, guarded. That felt fair. Later that evening, as I walked back toward the motel, I saw Mary locking up the garage. She paused when she saw me, hesitating like she was deciding whether to acknowledge me at all. I didn't push. I just stood there, hands visible, waiting. She sighed, the tension easing a fraction. "Walk," she said, not a question. We moved side by side down the street, the space between us deliberate. The town felt quieter than before, like it was giving us room. "You can't come back and expect things to pick up where they left off," she said. "I don't do unfinished business." "I'm not asking for that," I replied. "I'm asking for a chance to do something different." She stopped walking, turned to face me fully. The streetlight caught her eyes, sharp and searching. "Different how?" she asked. I swallowed. This was the part I usually avoided, the part where words had to match actions. "By staying," I said, "even when it's uncomfortable, even when I want to leave." She studied me for a long moment, then she nodded once. "You can stay," she said. "But not with me, not yet." The boundary hurt. It was supposed to. "Okay," I said. We stood there, tension humming between us, desire tangled up with restraint. When she stepped closer, it wasn't to kiss me. It was to rest her forehead briefly against mine, just long enough to remind me of what was at stake. Then she stepped back. "If you disappear again," she said quietly, "don't come back." "I won't," I said. And for the first time, the words didn't feel like a promise I was making to someone else. They felt like one I was making to myself. As she walked away, I didn't follow. I didn't chase the comfort of her presence. I went back to the motel alone, heart heavy but clear. This was the cost of wanting something real, showing up when it didn't reward you immediately. For the first time in my life, I was willing to pay it.